Hi everybody, I'm Sean Duhamel from Mass Retirees. Welcome back. Today I want to talk a little bit about some legislation that we have pending on Beacon Hill, and thank you for the questions that some of you left on our Facebook page last week, as well as emailed in to us. One of the hot bills that we're working on right now is House Bill 2213, filed by State Representative Mark Cusack from Braintree. Now, you might remember that last year our association got pretty close to passing some legislation relative to retirees who return to work in public service. Now, as a public retiree, you are allowed to go back to work. If you work in the private sector and you're a superannuation retiree, so in other words, receiving a normal pension, not a disability pension, you are allowed to work in the private sector, work as long as you want, and make as much money as you're capable of making. But if you go back to work in a public job here in Massachusetts, there are some restrictions that you have to abide by. And the long-standing rule is that you're limited to 960 hours a calendar year in terms of public service. So that would be working for the state or any city or town or district, county, authority here in Massachusetts. If you work in another state or you work for the federal government, there are no restrictions. But again, here in Massachusetts, you're limited to 960 hours. And then in addition to the hour restriction, you're also limited in the amount of money you can make. Now, our legislation only affects the hours. 960 hours a year doesn't really come out to more than about 18 and a half hours a week on average, and it's just not enough. And we keep hearing from a lot of you who are working part-time jobs, as well as hearing from some municipalities who utilize public retirees as a resource in their community, that 18 and a half hours a week just isn't enough. So last year, we tried to pass legislation that we felt was very reasonable to increase the hourly limit to 1,200 hours in a calendar year. And that comes out to about 23 hours a week on average. Still very part-time. 23 hours a week is not a full-time job, it's a part-time job. But unfortunately, Governor Baker disagreed with us last year. He vetoed the legislation in August. The legislative session for the year had already ended, and we didn't have the ability to override that veto. Well, we've refiled the bill again this year. Representative Cusack has been kind enough to sponsor the bill for us. Right now, the bill is before the Joint Committee on Public Service. We are anticipating a public hearing taking place this September or October. We're hoping for September, with the thought being that we'll move this legislation through the process, get it on the governor's desk either late in 2019 or early 2020. And if the governor chooses to disagree with us once again, we'll have ample time to override his veto for the coming year. But we're hoping that that's not the case. We're hoping that the governor can be brought around to see things a little bit different, see this as a reasonable step, and support the legislation. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that you still have a restriction in terms of how much money you can make in public service. Now, this applies to anybody, again, under the circumstances that I mentioned a moment ago. And the basic formula is this. It's the difference between what your former job currently pays and your pension, and then you add $15,000 to that amount. So just to keep the math simple, let's say your former job paid $50,000 a year, and your pension is $25,000 a year. 25 or 50 minus 25 comes out to 25. So you would then add 15,000 to the 25,000, and that brings you, if my math is right, up to $40,000 would be the amount of money you can make. Now, unfortunately, we don't keep those records at Mass Retirees. If you are in the situation, you're trying to determine what you're allowed to make, you need to contact the former agency that you worked for. Sometimes the retirement system can also be helpful, or PERAC might be able to be helpful, but you have to seek out that information on your own. It's not something that we're able to help you with. So with that, I'm going to sign off for this week. Thank you once again for tuning in. If you have suggestions on what you would like to see us address, you have questions, leave them in the comments below or send them in via email to us. But thank you once again for your support.